So welcome everyone to this. Welcome to International Education Week. Happy International Education Week. We've been waiting for this week and have been planning for it for a very long time. And we're so glad you could join our AFS webinars, and especially this one. In the next 1 hour, we'll be talking about deconstructing the elitist approach to international education. So let's get started here. Your speakers today, myself, my name is Bright Musyoki. I work in the Learning and Development team at AFS International, and I am joining you from Kenya this afternoon. And I am joined by two great panelists here. We have Phyllis and we have Diana. I'm going to ask Phyllis and Diana to unmute and say a quick hello, let everybody know where you're joining from and who you are.
Good morning.
Hello.
I'm joining you.
Oh, go, Phyllis. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Good morning. I'm joining y'all from the eastern shore of North Carolina in the U.S. right now.
Thanks, Phyllis.
Hi, and I am joining you from Accra, Ghana, and I work with AFS Ghana.
Right. Thank you, Diana. Yeah, Phyllis is the founder and owner of Diasporic Soul, and Diana is the national director at AFS Intercultural Exchange Programs, Ghana. And they will be joining me in this session. We hope to have a great conversation about this topic, and I have the agenda right here. So we'll have a quick round of introductions, which we just did. And then we'll talk about, what the problem is, how can we get to, a proper solution for this problem. And then lastly, we have time for you at the end to ask any questions that you have. And hopefully we'll have enough time to answer as many of them as we can. And of course, if we don't have enough time at the end, we'll provide a way for you to ask those questions so that they can get answered. If you have any questions while we go on, feel free to put them in the chat, and we will save time at the very end for questions and answers. So before we do much, I will stop sharing my screen now. And I love for everybody to see each other. That is why I create these as a meeting and not a webinar, so that we can all feel like we're, part of the conversation and, hopefully engage better. That's why I asked if you can. It would be great to have you on camera so that we can all interact better with each other. So that said, I'd like for us to dive right in. And the first question, of course, that I have for both Phyllis and Diana today is, do you think that the international education field is an elitist field?
Diana,
yes.
you want to take that one first?
Diana, you can go first.
Yes, sure. I'm happy to jump in. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be part of this panel this morning and afternoon. So, in sort of preparing for this panel session, I did a little sort of brushing up what the current trends are, especially in international education, what a lot of the educators are talking about and what academics are talking about as well. And it was really interesting. A lot hasn't changed since my time in school and just sort of trying to bring on board my personal experience in this. But yes, I do feel that international education remains to be quite elitist. Although in recent times there has been a lot of interventions by different organizations and groups to look at how that can be broken down and how access can be given to different groups and opening up diversity. But essentially, most providers still offer what is a traditional approach to international education. And so you need to go through a particular channel in order to have access. You know, you need to perhaps have been part of a particular network to even get access to the criteria that is needed to access some of these education provisions. And so I think overall it is elitist. I think probably in the future we will have to reimagine. I think all of us will have to reimagine new ways and different ways that we can break down international education and make it more inclusive and more diverse. But for now, it really sits in the hands of a group of people that are protecting what is, I guess, their privilege and their place in society, and they kind of don't want other people to have access to that. So I'll stop here, probably allow Phyllis to come in as well.
Thanks, Diana.
I agree with Diana. And for me, I think it's important to name my own positionality and privilege as an African American or African descendant American. And my background is tethered primarily to first generation Pell eligible students, and for folks who are international outside of the US, you have to be significantly challenged economically to qualify for a Pell Grant. So the majority of the students that I have served have, over the course of my career, have been Pell eligible students, first generation students, children of immigrants, and the capacity to afford a study abroad experience or international experience outside of a return home for a young person that may be tethered to another nation is virtually impossible. So part of the elitism or the exclusionary nature of this part of higher ed primarily is what I'm speaking to, and even K-12 is affordability, financial access. The other piece of this at the higher education in the US specifically is that, and there's a lot of conversation about this right now in the United States. If you look at the Atlantic, you look at the New York Times, look at other publications, there's a lot of consternation in the US about the value of a college, a quote unquote, and I'm using air quotes, a traditional college education, which is typically tethered to the academic enterprise. And so my experience repeatedly has been that those of us who are in student support roles, those of us who are in student development roles, for example, directives of multicultural centers or Black cultural centers, folks that are deans of students of in residence life or student affairs, often or any other co-curricular spaces, women's centers, LGBTQ centers, spaces where students flourish and find their own voices and find their capacity to lead and find their passions or pursue their passions. Often those staff members do not have the same cachet. They do not have the same credibility. They do not have the same positionality as faculty. And so we're not effectively integrating international education and international or global experiences into the co-curricular or recognizing how those two pieces intersect. What I hear when Diana names we've done it, we're doing it the way we've always done it, we're continually insisting that I have a certain set of seat time, I'm enrolled in a study abroad or international exchange experience that's tethered to a university. So there's a lot of ways in which we marginalize or don't provide opportunities for students. And I think in our heads, many of us still have 18-year-olds students, but even when you think about working adults who might benefit from such an opportunity later in their career or later in their life, those folks are excluded from these opportunities as well. There's lots
you're not. It's not about you miss anything. It's about security, because I don't know my students are. If any emergency happened, I don't know where you are. That's scary. That makes sense. and then you are under my watch, so you have to let me know. It's not whatever things you miss.
I was under.
Yes, you are.
I'll just jump in and ask all of us to maybe stay on mute. And if we have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or of course, note them down somewhere. And at the end, when we have the question and answer time, you can unmute and share at that point. Thank you. I'm sorry, Phyllis, you were saying?
I was just wrapping up and saying there are a variety of ways in which we have yet to fully consider the possibilities of international global education outside of being tethered to what is the traditional classroom-based academic enterprise.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you for sharing that and for painting that picture, both of you. And the reason I asked, for your personal, thoughts about this is, well, first of all, yeah, we all do have, what we think about this. And I asked this because thinking about myself, I always remember the first question people ask when I mentioned that I studied abroad is, how did you afford that? Or how did you get an opportunity to do that? And, the more you share this, the more you hear from people that it is actually not, you understand it's privilege. It's not a very common thing for everybody to get, to do, as, maybe you would have thought when you studied abroad or when you did exchanges or anything like that. That's the reason I asked that question. And, just to get to hear your opinions. And, I'm glad that you talked about, some traditional methods of international education, both of you, and we will get to that. I also like that you mentioned, brought up inclusivity and affordability. And I already see something in the chat about affordability, and we'll also talk about that as well. But like when we talk about an inclusive an inclusive approach to international education, talking about moving away from the traditional methods, what do you have in mind? What approaches are we talking about? Phyllis, you can go first, and then Diana.
I'm going to put an article in the chat. This was authored by myself and two gentle people from California, actually three, but two were active participants in the experience. So there's an organization, A2 Mend. It's a mentorship program, and it serves Black men in the community college space in California specifically. So this is a good example of a way in which global experiences have been reconfigured and reconsidered. One, the gentle people who run the program are all administrators at community colleges versus 4-year Research One institutions. Because if we're relying on Research One institutions to get young people, non-traditional students, to West Africa with Diane or myself, or you in East Africa, or someone in Indonesia, it's not happening in the way that at the pace. So these gentlemen who are student affairs practitioners have created opportunities for approximately 10 young men annually to go abroad to the continent. So they began in Ethiopia, they came to us in Senegal, subsequent to Senegal, they went to Ghana. On their travel to Senegal, they were able to go to Morocco in transition, as some of you all know who take students to West Africa. Morocco, Casablanca is often a layover, as is Paris, but those are two different places. So what's valuable about this example is, one, it's run by student affairs practitioners instead of folks that are tethered to their classroom, their syllabus, and their curricula. Two, it's tethered to community college students. Three, it focuses exclusively on Black male students in the United States. And if you don't understand how significant that is, that's another webinar. 4, these students have no out-of-pocket costs. Did you hear what I said? No out-of-pocket costs. 5, which takes me back to curricula, their experience is 10 days in Ghana, in Ethiopia, in Senegal, and the subsequent visit that they made this summer. So there is, is it Botswana maybe where they went this summer? So my point is that we also have to get out of the notion that I need a whole semester to shift what it is that I know about the world. I can shift what I know about myself. And as a yoga practitioner, I'm interested in your svadhyaya. I'm interested in your self-awareness. I'm interested in your restoration. And I can do that in 10 days. And it can be just as powerful, just as significant, just as impactful. And I can even, if you insist, write a paper about it after 10 days. I'll stop.
Great. Thank you, Phyllis. Diana?
Yeah, I really liked the angle Phyllis took, because she, in what was a very, very interesting story, described how international education can become inclusive. The first question you asked us about what our own experiences were, or whether it was an elitist structure. I mean, just think about it. The opposite of that is really how can a group of people who have decided that this is something that they want to be not inclusive, because so they're putting barriers in front of it so that it only appeals to a certain group of people. How can they decide to change the system? It is not until you decide to have people that are coming from outside of that bubble, so people that are not traditionally of the bubble, who are able to come in and say, we're going to do this differently. We're going to do it from our lens, from our perspective and how we see it. We're going to change things up. It's going to be a non-fee paying program. It's going to be, we're going to, come to people where they are. We're going to meet people where they are. In disadvantaged communities or in remote communities. We're going to meet people even at their ability level. How many people of certain disabilities, for instance, can access some of these education programs, So it really will have to take a group of people who are outside of the bubble, thinking about how it can make sense to them, how they can devise a system that works for them, to them. And it is possible. I think now with digital and technology, the different types of access that people have to information. I mean, for instance, look at language learning now. There is no need for you to sit in a classroom to learn a language anymore. If you have a smartphone, you can download an app and you can pretty much learn a language wherever you are, the comfort of your home, sitting in a bus, and you can learn a language, and you are not restricted to your own insecurity in the language that you speak, or whether or not you're able to express yourself in the classroom setting with the lecturer. All of that is cast aside because of what has essentially pushed away the barrier, which is technology, right? Which is digital. So there are different things that can be looked at, financial access, making sure that when you are devising eligibility requirements for certain programs, you're breaking it down and giving access to people that don't fit the traditional mold. Are you looking at people based on what is the understanding of accessing the program in terms of their intellect, or is it their skills and experience? So different things like that. But I really like the example Phyllis described, because that really is, that's like taking the mold and smashing it, you know? That's not even not even going by the mold. And I love that. And I think more education providers should consider doing it. But when you find that they are a small group of a particular elk, they will decide to do things in the way that they think, you know, works for them. So yeah.
Right. Thank you, you both for sharing. I like that, you've covered, technology, affordability, length of programs, because there are very many times people don't believe in, short exchanges and think that, you need to, if I'm studying abroad, then it needs to be for a whole semester or 6 months or a full year, when, it could be different. And in, just combining the length and technology and like just talking about virtual exchanges. Do you believe that these actually do work in accommodating, more people? There might not be the element of travel for some of them, but then just the connections that they build in their online exchanges. Do you think that is a step, enough in doing away with the elitism, or we still need that level of travel or movement?
I believe that virtual exchange programs provide a different aspect, I suppose, of the experiential learning that students can acquire. Certainly, nothing can take away the mobility angle, physical essence of you being placed in a different country, in a different place, smelling a different kind of air, the weather, etc., etc. Nothing can replace that, right? But when we look at perhaps what are the main themes or the main topical areas that a program is looking to cover, you're able to do some of that within a virtual space. You're also able to give people that flexibility around not being um, not being stuck in a specific physical location in order to access the information. There is an element of also being allowed to, so people tend to maybe hide behind the camera sometimes. And so if you're doing a virtual program or you're not necessarily in a classroom setting with a lot of other people, there is a little bit more freedom. And I think that goes to helping with the learning and helps to support the learning that the individual is taking up. So it doesn't cover it all, but I do think that it does provide an element of it.
Thank you, Diana. Phyllis, did you want to add on to that?
I think I agree with her. I don't think I have anything to add. I think there's some viability to it. And I think it's also value in integrating online or virtual contact pre and post to a on the ground experience, so that those relationships can be nurtured and maintained. Even if it is, for example, I work with an organization that hosts a leadership affairs student development side versus the classroom or the academic enterprise, although I've taught over the course of my career in that more traditional sense, that students that participate in that leadership experience from South Africa and Ghana have found value in interacting with their peers in the US and vice versa around the conference. So we can say study abroad, and that's not necessarily the only way that we can have an international education experience or a global exchange, right? So there is value on online engagement.
Right. Yeah. I also, if I can agree with you both, I think there is value in online engagement as well. And, at the end of this webinar, if you're wondering what virtual exchange is or what that looks like, we will share a few, examples and also how you can benefit from some of those. But before we get to that point, we do have, students here. We have people who may be representing institutions. We have some educators here, I believe. And I'm just curious to know, like, what are some things that we can all do together collectively, institutions, educators, students themselves, to, break these barriers, make international education more inclusive? What partnerships can we come up with to make it possible? I throw it out to either one of you who's ready to go first.
Well, I thought you meant the audience. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no,
I
not.
misunderstood what you were asking. One thing that's coming up for me, Brian, is also someone named in the chat South to South connections. So going back to the original question, I'm not sure if I'm directly answering your question now. For some of us, depending on where we sit in the world, and I'm very aware of my location as an American, and I can certainly trouble the waters around. Can people please mute? I'm very cognizant of the need to trouble the waters around being an American. But I also am very clear that I can't speak from any other place. And where I sit serving primarily Black students from under-resourced communities who are typically, but not exclusively, first generation college students, part of the exclusivity is the choice about what we expose students to or what we place value on. I don't know what it's like in the academy across the world or in other countries. But the idea that students, when I started Diasporic Soul, what I saw was that students were not being offered the opportunity to come to the continent and by the continent, I do mean Africa. And when they were being offered the opportunity in the US to travel to the continent, South Africa was the primary location. And so what that meant was folks weren't considering places like Ethiopia or Kenya in the east, or Botswana or Zimbabwe in the south, or Ghana or Senegal or Cote d'Ivoire or Cape Verde in the west. Not to mention North Africa, which is part of the continent. That's a whole nother webinar or two. So I think that for there to shift in how we approach some of this work, we have to examine our own biases or notions of what success or achievement look like, and who gets to decide, and where do we want enrichment to take place? What kind of connections do we want students to have? And even, are we even considering what it might look like for our faculty? Often we consider faculty, but we don't consider staff. What would it look like if you're at an institution and your staff, many of which, because they are in student affairs, are early career professionals? What would it look like for them to have this experience that they may not have ever had as undergraduates or as traditional students? Yeah, I'm not sure I'm answering your question. I'm really thinking deeply about the whole question of this enterprise, Brian, and I apologize if that's not helpful.
No, I think that's helpful. Especially, when you talk about, finding out what our biases are, and, think about what connections do we want, our students to have or build. And maybe, that's a good place to start, in thinking about, okay, this is what we want. So then we might need to partner up with, this institution or, these group of people who can help, make the field of international education more inclusive. So no, that is helpful. Diana, did you have something to add as well?
Yeah, I think Phyllis she really said it. I mean, the point about biases is so broad and will probably, like she said, require another webinar. I mean, that we can talk about this with. But I believe that there is a lot and there are different facets that we need to look at. The idea of what constitutes an international education. It goes back to what what is our thinking about it, especially if you make reference to a concept like South connections. In AFS Ghana, this is something that we have recently started discussing in terms of our exchange programs. Within the network, there are various challenges with regards to moving from sub-Saharan Africa to the West, visa being one, cost of flights being another, access to scholarships and funding for these programs is another, for instance. And so we have had to try and see how can we deconstruct this entire program? How can we come up with a solution that fits with the individuals who we are targeting and who are interested in international education and options? And how can we look at it from the basis of this is what they're looking for? They're looking for a different perspective. They're looking for a different experience. They're looking for access to a global experience. They're looking for the opportunity to see others similar to them, but in a different environment, that can help motivate them and inspire them and think about how they can do things differently. And why can't we do that, for instance, in a South Africa or a Malawi or an Ethiopia? Why does it always have to be the traditional route of the US, Canada, the UK, and then the rest will follow after? It really is sometimes very, very challenging. I had a conversation with a parent the other day who his son is a science student and he wanted his son to do a program in Canada, and he didn't hear any other country apart from Canada. Canada was it. It was like, my son's going to Canada and that's it. And I said to him, have you considered India? And I said, India has amazing institutions for young people. They're doing great things in STEM. They're building all these really interesting labs in the classrooms that are giving the kids, the opportunity to build things. They're doing AI. They're building platforms. They're ahead of the game. Every single tech company right now sitting in Silicon Valley has some group of creators sitting in India building the foundation of everything that they're doing. Okay, so if you look at it from that basis, why don't you go to India instead of saying that you're sending your kid to North America somewhere? And this man looked at me like, are you crazy? You want my son to go to India? And we had a whole back and forth banter, but again, it went back to the whole conversation about the information that we are fed by the media, the information that we have access to in terms of what is existing across our own continent in Africa, what the perception of having access to an education in India versus in the West, what that means. It really is a whole discussion that we need to have, you know. And it has to start somewhere. We have to start somewhere. It has to start small. But yeah, that for me was a huge insight. I'm still pushing programs in India, in Ghana, and my staff are always making fun of me about this, but I had the pleasure of spending over a week in India last year, and it was life-changing. I was blown away by everything I saw. We had an education tour. We visited some schools and institutions, and I was just so moved by the entrepreneurial nature of Indians and their desire to push. And I was like, but this needs to be shared wider. You know, we need to talk about this more, but it's not being spoken about. It's not being shown in our media. It's not being discussed. And I'm sure aside India, there are many other countries that are just not accessible or top of the mind when it comes to education and when it comes to having some kind of an exchange or an experience in a global setting. So a lot to talk about, a lot to try and change, but yeah, that's the way that I see it.
Thank you both for sharing. Yeah, from what I see and hear is, yeah, while talking about deconstructing the elitism, we might also need to deconstruct our own biases on, what we think we can, benefit from. Like, that example is a very good one of, people thinking you only need to go to certain areas of the world, and, that's what counts as, exchange. But then we have so much that can happen all over, and people need to see that. And I think that was also another point of discussion for us to realize, how can we all work together? So maybe marketing some of these destinations better, and what students can benefit from some of these places, and work with people who can help us spread that word out, and see have the word out as much as possible. Because then, for someone who was thinking, oh, I can never afford to go to Canada or the US, maybe going to Ghana or India or somewhere else is cheaper, and they can finally have that opportunity that they're looking for. And last question, while still talking about money and affordability, how can we design like specific scholarship opportunities or fundraising opportunities, and to help participants or students study abroad, or promote international education, from your own experiences, maybe scholarship funds that you've managed or that you know of. How can people be more proactive about these opportunities, creating scholarship opportunities or grabbing scholarship opportunities to study abroad and go on exchange?
I am again gonna name my positionality and my place in the world, and only try to speak from that experience and not purport that this is applicable globally. But my push has been in this work to say to institutions, cut a check. And I understand that seems disruptive perhaps. But when I think about some of these institutions, as I sit in the South of the United States, where my ancestors worked for free and facilitated the wealth generation for generations of people and institutions. So Duke has built its wealth on tobacco money. The Dukes did not pick no tobacco, nor did they pick any cotton. And I'm sorry if this makes people uncomfortable, but these institutions are able to exist with large endowments. And I'm talking about some of the elite institutions. They have the capacity not only to facilitate movement of students from first generation Pell eligible students who have been marginalized economically. They have a capacity to simply send a child, a young person, to Ghana tomorrow, a whole plane load. And they also have the capacity to leverage their influence so that Diana can put a group of Ghanaian students on a plane to go to Senegal, or to go to South Africa, or to go to Vietnam, or to go to France, or to go to Afghanistan. Shout out to the people in the room from Afghanistan, right? Like, there's enough wealth in this world. And I recognize this is like this may be pie in the sky, American colloquialism, like you're being silly, you're being grandiose. It's impossible. But there's enough wealth in this world for these types of exchanges to happen. But in a really finite, specific way, institutions can make choices about sending smaller contingents of students and professionals. You know, in France and in Senegal, the system, there are opportunities for formation. So a student who's in formation might be given the opportunity in the same way that a community college student might have in the US to travel and to have exposure in the trade. We consistently think about this as, oh, it has to be this erudite, classroom based. I have to be tethered to the Sheikh Anta Diop University. Why? Why? Why can't I be as a student at X and Y community college or in X and Y trade program anywhere in the world? Why can't I sit with somebody who's in the trade that I'm in? Whether it's engineering, whether it's welding, whether it's carpentry, we have diminished the value of folks who work with their hands and work with their hearts and work with their heads to have an exchange. Right. And Diana was able to go to India through her professional trajectory. There's room in international education for those of us who are seasoned, like Diana and I, to travel and to grow and have professional development experience. It's not just for a 22-year-old college student somewhere in the world. It's also an opportunity for tradespeople and professionals to deepen their practice, not to have a something for their resume necessarily. Someone in the chat asked about Western centric modernity. Like, all of that is, we gotta trouble the waters around this stuff. So I'm not interested in talking about scholarships. I'm interested in poking at the chest of the bears who are sitting on those tobacco dollars, or the indigo dollars, or the gold dollars, or the oil dollars. Send your employees to Senegal, send your employees to Ghana, send them to Nigeria. Let's go.
Let's go indeed. No, I actually have a question for Phyllis on this. I want to understand. So if you can describe to me, what was the thinking behind the program you described earlier, getting these students and bringing them across the world to different countries? What was the idea? Where did that come from?
You directing that to whom, Diana?
To you, to you.
Oh, I was distracted by a question in the chat. I'm so sorry.
I know. I got caught as well. But no, the reason why I was saying that is it goes back to the question, or trying to understand why this isn't a thing, right? Why this is seen as some kind of special privilege experience that only a few people have access to. It goes back to questioning the why,
Mm,
why
yes.
take yourself out of your comfort zone? Why decide to learn in a space that you're not familiar with, or to learn about a different culture, or to understand how people operate? Why? You know, and I think the more we decide to ask the whys, the sooner that we will get to the answers. And that why question goes to the people with the money, as Phyllis said, with the people who have the power to make those decisions in those ivory tower institutions. People like yourselves just sitting back and asking, why do you consider where you are to be the end all and be all? Why do you not want to go beyond what you're familiar? And I think once we get to that point, once we realize that it's about understanding who we are as a people, understanding our place in the world, understanding belonging, understanding culture, understanding different types of people, having that passion and love and understanding of the human experience, then you will find that there is no longer a reason why you should sit back and say this is not something that everyone should experience. Because currently it is only open to a few. It's based on privilege, it's based on who you know. I work for AFS, but working in this organization, I've come to understand, and I've heard it said many times when I speak to so many people, partners, other stakeholders, people with the money, they say, but AFS is for privileged kids. AFS is for the rich kids. Why are you talking to me? Because there is this understanding or perception that this kind of opportunity should only be available to people that have money to throw at it, when it's much more than that. Because at AFS, we have been able to measure and really tell the story and the experiences of people that have had access to these programs only through scholarships. And once they did have access to the programs, how those experiences blew up their lives, changed everything. You know, they're no longer the same people. And it took 1 year. It took 1 year of an exchange program and specific steps, specific programs that have been built within the exchange program for learning, for reflection, for understanding, for repeat, rinse, for action, all those different things. And they come away from it and it's like, I'm a different person. I see things differently. And I get that same story told when I speak to alumni that have gone on the program. AFS changed my life forever. It was 1 year, 1 year. And when we talk about similar experiences for people that go on our short programs, even 1 month, 2 weeks, 3 months, it's mind-blowing, you know. But I think we should all continue to ask ourselves the why. Definitely try and go to India. I would recommend it. But continue to ask the why and continue to think that this is something that can not only change you as an individual, that can lead you to impact on your community and, you know, the wider world that you are in.
Thank you, Diana. And yeah, and thank you, Phyllis, also for sharing. And I like that in sort of wrapping up, you said, you know, you mentioned the whole thing of, oh, AFS programs are only for, you know, rich people. And, you know, like saying AFS here, but then basically all, you know, study abroad programs, international education programs, you know, that's what it's thought to be. But, and basically the whole conversation today has been, you know, challenging that and questioning that and what we can do differently to make it, you know, more affordable and for people to know that it is possible for them to go on these programs. There is one big question from Maz, and some elements of it might have been answered already. But Maz in the chat says, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on the impact of short-term intercultural exchanges in light of what Bennett and others like him say in terms of stages of intercultural development. and the time needed to arrive at those. We've also seen many grant makers preferring short-term programs that affect many participants over longer experiences that may offer a deeper immersion, but for fewer beneficiaries. What are your thoughts on this direction in intercultural programming? So yeah, your thoughts on the shift towards shorter, short-term programs and how that relates to the time needed to arrive to intercultural competence. I can summarize that.
I think we covered it, but I would repeat that the value of the exposure, and as Diana just named, what is life shifting and life altering for folks to be on the ground immersed. So I think short term, but also asking what happens in that concentrated amount of time. So if you're with Diaspora Soul for 14 days, what happens in the pre-trip? That is intercultural education. What happens in the post-trip? That's intercultural education. How do we integrate things like the intercultural competency certification in or underneath that experience? Or if you're with Diana in Ghana for 2 months or three months, what are we doing in that 3 months that is highly impactful? Where do you create relationships with folks in the community, in the village, in the town that you're in? Because I think if you're short term and you're only on the bus, you're only in the coach, you defeated the purpose. If you're only in the Radisson Blu on the Corniche and Dakar, you defeated the purpose. So if you're not immersed, then the 10 days is not as impactful, right? Or if you're in the country for a year and all you are in or on these highly westernized spaces, then you missed Ghana, you missed Kenya, you missed wherever you are.
Right. Thank you for getting that, Phyllis. And I would like to open, I don't see any other questions in the chat, but is there anyone who had a question that they were saving up for later that they would like to ask at this point? I know we're a bit behind on time, but we can take 2 questions, 3 questions, depending on how long they are.
I liked how Ryan was acting like an AI chatbot in the chat section. For a minute there, I thought it was AI.
Oh, um, Rodolfo had a question I see in the chat. And they were asking, how could you, for Phyllis, if you could share from your experience with diasporic soul about reframing a widely used term like culture into a more holistic one like soul. How does that shape your work and what inspired that choice?
Soul is a wink and a nod. It's a wink and a nod to Black folks in the diaspora more broadly, and to African Americans or African descendant people with tethers and ties to the tobacco that I named earlier. It's a wink and a nod. Understanding that being Black, quote unquote, in Ghana or Sena. So if I'm Serer Safin and I live in Sebi-Kutan, Senegal, I'm not the same as a person that might self-identify as Black in Louisiana or Detroit. So it is a wink and a nod at folks who are from places like Detroit and Louisiana. And it is a desire to affirm that there is a connection between African descendant people in the US in particular, but albeit not exclusive. Cultural values, we're not a monolith. Kenya is not Ghana, and Ghana is not Swaziland, right? But there are some cultural values that I think we see across the globe that are very different from what the West has foisted upon us. So it's a wink and a nod, and a lot of subtleties around how do Black folks in the United States in particular, although I think there's some application based on the psychologies of oppression that Fanon talks about. How do I see myself differently? How do I see my worth in my Black body differently than the way the West for she's has told me what the West has told me it is? How do I reclaim and celebrate my cultures? I always add a parenthetic S to that.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Phyllis. I know we're right on time, but there's one question from Maz that I also want to ask. It's in the chat. And yeah, basically Maz is saying that so many organizations focus, put so much focus on students whose parents can afford, to go on exchange or, paid programs. And she wants to know if you have any advice or suggestions for smaller organizations to challenge the status quo and yeah, reach out to all parents and maybe come up with ways to secure funding for those students. Diana, I can throw this out to you because I know, yeah, you work at IFS. This is your everyday job.
Yeah, no, that was a great question and comment from Maz. This really is a challenge. I would say that AFS, yes, we've been guilty of that in some aspects, but gladly, we have come up with different ways that we're trying to challenge the status quo. So we do have a kind of scholarship model that we run in the organization that looks at how we can access funds from those that have it to be able to provide programs and scholarships to those that don't. I mean, I'm not going to share our institutional secrets here, but just to give you that overview that there is a way of going around it, and it's something that smaller organizations can do. It goes back to being able to speak to the people that appreciate and value the purpose of international education and providing that access to young people or kids that are not from wealthy backgrounds. Because like you said, the impact of the experience is so much greater on them than it is on the wealthier kids who have probably done, a holiday somewhere in the south of France anyway. And would not, this would just be seen as another thing that they're doing. So I 100% agree with you, but there are ways that you can be creative in still making sure that you're able to raise funds to run your organization. But you can find a way for some of those funds to be driven in a scholarship fashion. I know Phyllis doesn't like to hear about scholarships because she just wants to smash everything. But scholarships are a way that we can start small to build that momentum, yeah, and get more people involved in the conversation. I would love to share with you maybe offline and discuss ideas if you would like that. So,
and I would add to what Diana said, and my relationship with AFS began when I moved to Senegal and started diaspora. So and I know that the model has changed, but I became a facilitator for the intercultural what at the time was the intercultural competency certification. So you can be a practitioner in a space, like you could be a youth worker, right? Or you can be a employer who makes a decision to identify somebody within the organization who has the background and capacity to be a facilitator. And you can facilitate an experience similar to what I co-facilitated in South Africa for youth workers. So again, this idea that you can raise money, you can leverage scholarships, but also thinking about scholarships and fundraising in the context of people who are not necessarily tethered to the traditional university or academic enterprise, right? So I think, again, getting off of the campus, getting out of the ivory tower, and thinking about how do I facilitate this for folks from different walks of life, and allowing the fundraising and the scholarship to be tethered to that as well. I have a meeting I have to go to.
Thank you, Phyllis and Diana. I just have a few wrap-up slides for everybody. So we should be wrapping up in the next 2 to 3 minutes. I'll go ahead and share those for the benefit of everybody. Right. So yeah, thank you everyone for your participation, for coming, for being patient until the very end. All attendees receive a digital badge just to acknowledge. You're all seeing my screen, right? Right. Yeah. Just to acknowledge your participation, feel free to share this on social media or any platform that you prefer. And it also comes with a printable PDF certificate that you can print from Credly. So this will be coming your way today. The next thing,
Brian, you're not on the
yes.
slide.
I'm not on the slide?
No, go to slideshow, please.
Oh,
There you go.
sorry. My
Gotcha.
apologies. There we go. You'd think I would be proficient at this. Great. So that is the digital badge that you will receive. Please claim it and share it far and wide. The next thing is, of course, we would love to get feedback from you. So please fill out this brief survey. Jen is putting the link in the chat. Or if you can scan the QR code, please go ahead and do that. We appreciate your feedback in making our AFS offers better. So please feel free to get in and give us feedback about this session and other sessions that you will attend this week. I hope you have the link in the chat and can save it so that I can go to the next slide. Which is, inviting you to connect with us this week. It's International Education Week. We still have one more session today at 2 p.m. New York. If that's a favorable time zone for you, please attend that session. And we do have 3 sessions tomorrow. That's Wednesday, and 1 session on Friday. If you go to the link that is also being posted in the chat, you can see the full schedule and sign up for these sessions. Lastly, or second last, learn more about our educational framework for active global citizenship. Jen is also sharing a link to our website where you can learn more about how AFS creates active global citizenship. And, through these 4 parameters that we have, you can learn more or read more about it on the website. So I won't get into that right now for time. And lastly, join us at the 2025 AFS Youth Assembly. Are you between 18 to 32? The Youth Assembly next year is from August 8th to the 10th in New York City. So if you go to www.youthassembly.org, you will find all details about the theme, the dates, and how you can register from early on, as early as now. And lastly, explore virtual offerings, because we talked about this not being for just 22-year-old college kids, but also for adults. So these are some of the virtual offerings that we have at AFS, Global U programs, Global App programs, the Peak Certified Facilitator Program, Effect Plus. And some of these programs have a scholarship. Some of them are paid programs. You can click on those links and find out which is which, and learn more about those programs as well and how you can get involved. And lastly, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions or comments that you can't put in the chat right now, please send them to ve.learn@afs.org. And that is a inbox that is monitored by a few people on the team, and we will be able to get back to you. And of course, our socials, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, AFS Intercultural Programs. Thank you, everybody.